I was with another gentleman. I'll tell you about land memory, Mr. Ward, out of Vine City.
Mm,
And we were talking one day at the Connect, and he said, "Have you ever heard about the lynching that took place in Athens
mm.
in like the 30s or the 40s?" And I was like, "Nope. I'm not even in Athens. I'm in Atlanta. So tell me, right?" And he's like, "There's this lynching that took place in Athens, and they say they drugged the man. They got the man out of the jail, and they drug him 2 miles south, and then 3 miles north, and then 2 miles east, and then they dropped his body there." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Okay, cool. That's what they did." And I was like, "Yeah, that's what they did. Like, where are we going?"
Mm.
He said, "Not even 15 days later, guess what happened?" I said, "I don't know, Mr. Ward, tell me." And he said, "A tornado came through and took the exact same path." I was like, oh, it solidifies. I'm keep having these moments that solidifies there's memory in this land we walk on. And
Good people, what's up? What's good, man? Blessed be your host, Caleb Smith. We have a very special guest in the building, man. She's featured on our doc, Unearthing the Black Mecca. Great journalist, scholar, MacArthur Foundation fellow. Now she's doing
ah,
major things. Miss Ann Hill Bond, how you doing
I'm
today?
good. I'm good. Let
Yes.
me. That MacArthur thing is so funny.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna start there,
Okay.
right? I'm gonna start
Let's
with
do
this
that.
MacArthur fellowship. So MacArthur Foundation fellows, they have this like genius thing, right? Like
Hmm.
and I think everybody think that's what it is. One day it will be, right? However, the fellowship is steeped in my work in media and journalism, and this is one of the first time that the MacArthur Foundation is really just highlighting leaders in
Hmm.
media and journalism.
Mm.
So yes, I am a MacArthur Foundation
Yes, ma'am.
fellow, but it is not but it is in the media and
Hmm.
journalism leadership
Hmm.
division. Not yet the genius, but
Yes, ma'am. Ah,
one day,
you
one
already
day.
there.
Give me about 5 years.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Give them 5 years to catch up with me.
Yes, ma'am. I love that. I love that. Seeing you and you were just killing it
Yeah,
left and right, journalism
thank
and
you.
media.
Hmm.
What just inspires you to be involved when it comes to being into media
Hmm.
and journalism right now during this time?
My children, I have
Mm,
3 children, an 18-year-old and two twins that are 14.
mm,
And I was just saying to someone yesterday that was complimenting me about my work. And I was like, well, I don't feel like I'm doing enough, right? Because I want when my children go on whatever the Google's is in
mm,
the 50 years from now,
mm,
I want my name to just pop up, right?
mm,
Like, I just don't want them to have to unearth
mm,
my legacy,
mm.
right? I wanted them to be very clear, like, what mommy did in the world and what they need to be doing in the
Right.
world, right? Because my parents and my great grandparents on both sides, it wasn't granted I can't Google them, but their work speaks for itself,
Right.
right? And it's tangible. So I want it's my name, my legacy for them to be tangible
Mm,
because we all know the best wealth in this world outside of your health is your network,
mm,
right? And so I do this for 7 generations to come,
mm,
not
mm.
just today. So
Yeah.
I'm never working for today. I'm working
Mm,
for the people that have transitioned. So I work for
mm,
the dead and I work for the unborn.
mm.
That's why I do my work.
That's heavy.
Hmm.
That's heavy. History, right? That's so important here in
Yes.
Atlanta. So
Hmm.
much Black history,
Yep.
preservation too. How
Yes.
can we start preserving our buildings better and our history, our pictures? Like you
Right.
said,
We were just talking about pictures,
the
the small
smallest things,
things.
like not marking Big Mama's picture, saving those things. How can we start preserving our history and stories?
Yeah, I think one thing we have to do is we have to know that it's valuable,
Mm,
right? Like the biggest, especially here in Atlanta, the biggest export is Black culture,
mm,
right? And so it didn't just pop up, right? That was we're approaching on August 11th the 50 years of hip hop
yeah.
nationally, and we just, if anybody said it, we just celebrated the 40th year of Freaknik, right,
Mm.
in March.
That's crazy. 40. Wow.
40 years.
Wow.
Freaknik has been around for 40 years. So it's one of those things, when you look at time, it is being marked by African people, African Americans, Afro Caribbeans, because I can talk about reggae. I can talk about that influence on reggaeton. I mean, the father of hip hop is Jamaican,
Yeah.
right? And so it's one of those things that we have to start being very intentional about what we are going to preserve, and that's everything, right? Like people say, don't sell Big Mama's house, but also keep Big Mama's Bible, because that goes back generations. But we don't find value in that Bible, right? Especially now where you see today people are leaving the church. Yeah, you can leave the church, but there's things that were meant for you, right? That we need to celebrate. One thing that we do in African American culture is we talk about Sankofa, right? With that bird that has like feet for it, and you go back. But when you translate it because I grew up a part of my life in Ghana, so the Ndinkra symbols in Sankofa is a part of West African culture. But when you go and you translate the word for word for Sankofa, it is not taboo to go back and fetch what was left behind. And we often find that it's taboo to look back in the African American culture. We don't want to talk about slavery. MLK is cool. He fly when he fly.
That
He
was so
fly
long ago.
in
Yeah.
right. It's so long ago. He's
Yeah.
flying January, and it's flying February. And Black music, Black culture. I mean, look at June. June is Black Music Month. We don't even talk about Black music in June because we're talking about Juneteenth. We're talking about Pride. We're talking about this. But what about what the music has carried us through, right? So we have to be very, very, very clear that we are valuable and we are walking museums. We are walking libraries. We are walking index for the next generation. And if we don't preserve that, how are we leaving? What service are we doing to the generations that are coming? And how are we honoring the people that have done this, that have done the work, right? Because they were very, very, very clear to leave our blueprints and breadcrumbs for us. So we have to do that for our generation. So that is why I preserve, and that's why I encourage other people to preserve. And then the other thing is, you don't want nobody telling your story, right? Like we were just having this conversation. I tell my children this. No, I tell my mom this. Nobody's going to advocate for me better than me. Nobody's going to tell Ann Hill Bond's story better than me when I'm ready to tell it, right? So now you have people telling stories that doesn't have the experience attached to it. They have a degree, maybe they run parallel or adjacent to it, but they haven't sat with it. They haven't experienced it. It doesn't run through their veins. It is not of them, but they're trying to tell the story, and it's necessary. However, we need to do a better job of just telling our full and complete story. If not, we're going to continue to see our stories being told in a very traumatic way.
Ooh, that's good.
And that's the other part of why I do what I do in journalism and preservation, because I want to be clear that the African American experience is not just traumatic, it is also joy. And you see that. Roots is a beautiful story. I love it. But we often find the trauma being elevated and not the joy of family and traditions. We love Color Purple, and that is, we can pull Color Purple or whatever, right? We pull quotes from it or whatever. But we often miss the joy of it, right? So it's those things. Like as we're doing historical narratives, same thing with Will Smith. I think he just did Emancipation, but there was joy there too. So I encourage people to tell our stories, because if it's not, we will always be in position to be re-traumatized and not filled with joy to be able to continue on for hundreds and thousands of years to come. There's joy in our story.
Oh, man, that's good. That's good. And from filming, being on Auburn Avenue, seeing it earlier today. This is, again, a true story, like we told you off camera. Shout out to Reese, great people, Word, everybody dope.
Absolutely.
Me, Aaron, Sid, on the way out, just got done filming, and it's this white man and he's driving. It's a
Mhm.
tour bus.
Mhm.
People paid to be on that tour bus.
Mhm.
He has a microphone, the
Mhm.
headset. He's talking on the microphone. This is Auburn Avenue. Da, 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 da. And all three of us were staring like we saw a dinosaur walking
Yeah,
down the street.
I
Like,
bet.
this is crazy that somebody's monetizing.
Oh.
Clearly, you could tell that he's not from the community
Yeah.
at all. For somebody that's doing research
Mhm.
in media, how
Mhm.
do you feel when it's other people telling our stories sometimes?
One, I'm always side eyeing who funded it, right? Like,
Mm,
goodness well, you could have found somebody else, right? You could have found somebody that's from the community, because
yeah.
the journalism that I'm privileged to do is community led journalism, right?
Mhm,
Like, I have to be in space, talking to people, hearing people, from coffee shops to grocery stores
mhm,
to city hall to the Gold Dome. I'm always listening. I'm
mhm,
always a very active listener.
mhm,
And when I hear it, it's like, lockbox, lockbox,
mhm,
lockbox. How do we turn this into a story? But then when you go and we're talking to, our editors and so forth, and we're
mhm,
turning it into stories, or we're moving forward with a preservation of a space, it is always, okay, let's go back to the community.
mhm,
Community knowledge is undervalued, especially
mhm,
Black community knowledge,
mhm,
right? We don't see line items for Miss Mabel, who just told us about the house up the block that was such and such and such and such and such and such,
wow.
right?
Yeah.
Or or like that traditional, or the candy lady, or
Mhm,
we don't have line items on our budget for these people, right?
mhm,
Or the universities and the big corporations that are coming in to tell our stories, they don't value community knowledge.
mhm,
And I think that's really the side eye for me. Like, you extracted, and what did you give back?
mhm,
What did you give back to know this story,
mhm,
right? Because you didn't just come up on it,
mhm,
right? You had to go somewhere, and somebody had to tell you this story, because you're not privy to this community.
mhm,
So how did you give back to the
mhm,
community or the person that shared their knowledge with you,
mhm,
right? It's no different than intellectual property.
mhm.
That was their intellectual property. What is the value on Black IP? What is the
Right.
value on Black community knowledge?
Yes, ma'am.
And that is my my I don't my not my issue, my worry at times when I see these stories being told. I want to know who told you this story, and I
Mhm,
want to know, what was your reconciliation process with this
mhm.
person,
Right.
right? Because they shared something with you that was both trauma and joy.
Mhm,
They brought you into their personal lives. They probably
mhm,
cooked for you. You
mhm,
probably came there more than once, right?
mhm.
You brought in other people, because you know how we are as Black
Yeah.
people. What such and such can tell you,
Yeah.
then we call this person, and we are just this network of our own,
Yeah.
right? And so, what I wonder, how did that person give back
Mm,
to empower and to let them know that their story is valuable?
mhm.
What credit? I often look at credits,
Yeah.
right, and see who is on the credits,
Mhm,
who's listed as a producer, executive producer, if it's a film or just content, right? Who took the picture? Where'd you get the picture from?
mm,
Like, all of that. A lot of times we'll see people credit, like, the Atlanta History Center,
mhm,
right? And I'm like, yeah, but the Atlanta History Center didn't just fall up on this picture. Where did this picture come from,
mm,
right? But what I realize is, oh, the Atlanta History Center bought this picture, so they can just use them as credit. But
yeah.
how powerful would it be is, like, the Atlanta History Center got this from this, and this, and
That's
this
right.
on the credit line.
Yeah.
So I'm always interested in, I would be interested in, and I would have probably stopped the guy. Like,
Mm,
how'd you get here?
mm.
Right? Like, hey, sir, how did you get here?
Yeah.
Who told you to come down here?
Wow.
What is your business? And I would have researched his business
Mm,
to see, one, how much are you charging?
yeah.
Two, how often are you coming to Auburn Avenue? And
Mm,
three, are you connected to HDDC?
mm,
Did you go and sit with the people down at HDDC that are keeping this block, that are advocating for the streets, the street signs, and the place, and the historical placements, and the sidewalks? And,
mm.
how often are you coming down here and spending your money?
Wow.
Right? Did you stop and get a bite at mangoes or something. Like,
Mm.
I want to know these things. So I'm always looking at that, and I'm always investigating that, to keep it in my mind. Because when I do my work, I'm very much like, how do I reinvest in people and
Yes, ma'am.
community, and letting them know that their knowledge is worth something.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Come on, that's excellent. Wow, starting the doc, filming it.
Yeah.
We were doing research, reading
Mhm.
articles, and
Mhm.
I came across one, setting the record straight, and it was yours. I think
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
about 1906, not the race riot, but the race
Yeah.
massacre.
You right. You better.
I read that and I was just blown away, man. Anybody who's tuned in, everybody make sure to read that article, Setting the Record Straight by
Yes.
Danielle Bonds. You
And
killed it.
Atlanta Voice.
Yes,
Yes.
Atlanta Voice.
Mm-hmm.
Reading that, I was mesmerized. I was
Mm-hmm.
blown away.
Mm-hmm.
What inspired that article, that project on telling that story properly?
So let me just say this.
Mm-hmm.
I am raised by I am being raised
Right.
by, and was raised by, and I'm being raised by, even in death, my father is still raising me, by very Pan-Africanist,
Mm.
right? Like, I knew about massacres
Mm.
before I knew about the Constitution.
Wow. Wow.
I knew about black emperors and black heads of states
Mm-hmm.
and black spaces before I knew, I don't know, before I knew Georgia history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before I knew about these things. My mother was born in the South in 1947 in North
Mm.
Carolina, and she moved to New York right when she turned 18, because she always felt like the South, she didn't connect with the South.
Mm-hmm.
She grew up in Jim Crow South, right?
Mm-hmm.
1947. Um and so she married my dad. He was from Jamaica,
Mm-hmm.
and she moved to Jamaica and had us, and we it was very clear in listening to my parents and listening to my mother, and particularly because she had that experience of segregation, which was very different from my dad's experience of classism and colorism,
Mm-hmm.
right? My dad experienced colorism because he was a darker skinned
Mm-hmm.
man, and classism because he was poor.
Mm-hmm.
But my mother experienced all of those things because she was black, right? In America, in the South. And so my history and my connection to African Americans, Afro Caribbeans, Jamaicans,
Mm-hmm.
Africans, people of African descent runs through my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always knew we weren't predominantly raised in the South
Mm-hmm.
because of the things that happened in the South, right?
Mm-hmm.
The massacres, the lynchings, the segregations,
Yeah.
the discriminations, the even my mother, she's still alive to this day. She's 76. Even her discontent with segregation, like, why are we integrating, right? Like, that's her
Mm.
thing. Like, why did we do that? The amount of money we lost in
Yeah.
that, right? Like, my
Yeah.
mother is that person for me.
Mm-hmm.
She's my lighthouse when it comes to understanding myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always known about massacres and these atrocities, but I've also know about the joys of the black church, and the
Mm-hmm.
joys of being in land and growing your own food and whatever. So when I came to Atlanta and I started reading about Atlanta history, one of those elevated, the massacre elevated, and I was like, oh, this is, I connected that massacre to the Tulsa massacre,
Mm-hmm.
and to the massacre of St. Louis, and
Yeah.
to the Wilmington massacre in North Carolina.
Yeah.
It was no different for me. It was just, oh, here's another one, which is
Mm-hmm.
sad, but it was like, oh, here's another one. And so it was just like, all right, cool. And again, it was my first time being entrenched in Georgia history, but it wasn't my first time understanding that these massacres have taken place around the country, around the world. Because
Yeah.
Africa has their own set of massacres. The Caribbean have their own set of
Mm-hmm.
massacres. So does South America. So it was just putting date and context to events that I already knew about,
Yeah.
right? And so I did I did it. I knew about it. I was like, okay, cool. And then in 2019, Fulton County Remembrance Coalition came about and said that they were doing soil collections for the massacre. And I was like, oh, I would love to do this. I love land. I love understanding the memory of the land. It's one of my passion, my hard work projects, or not even projects, initiative. Probably going to end up being my life work, understanding land memory and how it affects us today. And I'm going to tell you a very interesting story about that later.
Okay.
Because I do want to get
Please.
into land memory.
Yes.
But I went and I did it, and I did it for several lynching sites.
Wow.
I think I did it for about over 25. Over 25. I've been on all 36 lynching sites here in Georgia.
Wow.
And so in doing so, that story, I don't even know why it stuck with me. It just stuck. It was like, it's the Atlanta Race Massacre story. It's the Atlanta Race Massacre lynchings, the Warren Powell lynching, and the Dennis Hubert lynching. That is like, they're like my babies. They're like mine. Like, it's something about him. Dennis Hubert's anniversary of his lynching was just on June 15th. So, and the Atlanta Massacre is coming up, and Floyd Carmichael in July 31st is coming up. His lynching in Joyland, Pittsburgh area is coming up. So, but 1906 just stuck with me, and I want to believe it stuck with me because the number was low. I was like, wait a minute. Y'all running around here killing people for 4 days, black folks. And y'all telling me it's only 25 people? The math wasn't right. And I'm not a math person. Anybody.
Yeah.
I firmly believe in calling black men for math, right? And so I just didn't understand it.
Yes.
And then when I went and go back to my research that I did when I first came here in 2008, I was like, wait, where's the money? Where's the land laws? Where's the funds? How is this? Zero. Like, nobody really was talking about that. So it just never made sense to me. Then when I was actually able to go on site of these 25 lynchings that took place that day, it was like, I got to do more. And then when everybody started saying riot, I was like, this is not do y'all know what a riot is? What happened? It's so funny. If it's not 50 plus years ago, I struggle. California. Come on. Rodney King.
Oh, yeah.
Riot
Early
is
90s.
Yes. Yeah. Riot is Rodney King. To just put it in perspective, right? A civil unrest is 2020. Civil unrest is when you don't have killings, you just have people in the street, being angry and trying to figure out what to do. Massacres is when you have 3 or more people killed. Mass shootings. Massacres. You can't tell me this isn't a massacre. And so it stuck with me for those reasons. 1, the number count was low. 2, where is these people's money and land? And then 3, why are y'all calling it a riot? This don't add up. It's not a riot. People literally made the charge to go in the middle of the street in 5 points to kill black people. It was very clear. This was what we're doing today. We are killing black people. How is this a riot? What are you talking about? And so, I just started my walk and journey along with my 25 amazing ancestors and everybody that, the hundreds that are not documented. And I said, all right, y'all, let's go. And we have been walking this walk together since then. And it's been one of the things that I just enjoy talking about, enjoy uplifting, enjoy sharing, because it expands all the way to East Point, right? That massacre that took place for those 4 days expands all the way to East Point, and we don't talk about East Point enough. We have Zeb Long in East Point that was lynched as a part of the massacre. We have Brownsville over in Southeast Atlanta in the Carver High School cluster that fought the mob off. But that story gets so much bigger. You're actually talking about people in McDonough and people in Savannah and people in Augusta and Black people everywhere in Georgia because all of them band together to help save lives,
Mm.
right? And so in going through that and talking and walking on the land, um made it very clear that it was an assignment to me. And we say this over at the Connect Cooperative with Kiyomi. um your ancestors are talking to other people's ancestors,
Mm.
and it's like, oh no, this is that person's assignment, right? Like, I believe what is up is down, right? And so, like, how you and I are talking, our ancestors had to talk before we talked, right?
Mm.
And said, no, they need to get together,
Mm.
let's figure it out, right? And so we are playing what, to me, what you're seeing in the physical form is something that's already done spiritually.
Mm.
And so I was already very clear that the 1906 Atlanta Race Massacre, and like I said, the Dennis Hubert and Warren Powell and Zeb Long, and even Harriet Jacobs in North Carolina, her story of being a slave, an enslaved girl in the town that my mother grew up in. I read that book when I was probably 10. And I was like, wait, I know this house, and I know where this house is, and I know where that house is. And I would go randomly, just go to these places. Like, she was here. So I'm just, it's just one of those things. Like, when I walk the land of something that happened and I start researching the people, it's literally like my grandmother, my dad, my brother, like everybody that's on the other side is meeting the other people on the other side, and is like, this is your assignment, go do it. And so yeah, that's how it came up. It came up to, like, I was just assigned. And let me just say this. There was a group of people I was working with that totally annoyed me through the process. Totally annoyed me. And I was trying to leave this project. I was trying to, like, y'all can have 1906. I'm good. I got other history I can fool around with, right? And I would go home and essentially call my spiritual advisor, crying, boo-hooing, 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, like, I just wanted this to go away. Like, leave me alone. I don't want to be bothered. And he would be like, you can't, though. Like, you can't. Like, do you think anybody else is up this time of night thinking about this?
That's right.
Up with the book, trying to figure out the names and on newspapers.com and nope. No, they're checking off a box. This is your life work. You can't leave them. They are with you now. They go where you go. And I'm like, So I had to overcome a lot in that 1906 article. That's not the first time I wrote that article. That's probably the third time it's been published. Right? But I had to overcome a lot. And that article that you're talking about made the front page last year when I said, I guess, statewide or nationally, that it's not a massacre. Like, it's not a massacre, it's a riot, and we should be calling it such. And actually nationally, because that's when Congresswoman Nikema Williams came in and actually wrote that in her legislation. She called it a massacre, right? And so that I went through trials and tribulations since 2018-19. When I really got deep into the 1906 Atlanta Race Massacre. And it's just been up since there. We've just been going up since there.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. She's killing it.
They just been coming along. I love them, though. I love each and every person, all 25 victims. They're like my own, and the ones that are still being discovered, and the descendants. I met some of the descendants, and
I was going to ask you about that. Walker family,
the Walker sisters.
Yeah.
Mr. Farrow, Ralph Baker. I just don't know how to explain. Yeah, it's just it's when you asked me about preservation earlier, right? But you found your life work when you don't mind doing it for free.
That's right.
Right? I don't get paid for this. My preservation work, I don't get paid for my preservation work. I get paid for my journalism, right? So when I'm in the archives and I'm walking Southview Cemetery and I'm talking to people, when I do that in my preservation world, when I'm in the Georgia Trust or at the Wren's Nest or whatever, that is for free, and I'm beaming. I took somebody to Southview the other day, and I'm skipping around Southview Cemetery, and I'm like, girl, she's like, why are you acting like this is a playground though? And I'm like, it's not a playground, but it's my happy space.
That's right.
And so yeah, it's just I just love telling the story and love being able to share the joy in it. The joy is that people found their voices, right? The joy is that we did get Auburn Avenue out of it.
Yeah.
The joy is that we are able to see the products of Clark College and Gammon, and we are able to see the camaraderie of the AU Center come together after the massacre. We are able to see just Atlanta thrive after the massacre, Black Atlantans thrive after the massacre. We are able to see something that is untold, which is the rebuilding part. Yeah. We're able to see it in real time, but it still has its disparities and like being number one in income inequality and us having just Auburn Avenue and not 10 Auburn Avenues.
That's right.
But there's joy there, and I love that about being able to share it from a person of African descent, right? I'm not gonna just give you the trauma. I'm gonna give you the stories of the Walker sisters holding my hand on the cemetery and telling me to come here. Like, girl, come here. I got something to tell you. Now, this is what you got to do, right? And giving me my assignment. And I just love that. And I wish that for everybody as they go through their walk and their preservation walk, because we all have to walk in preservation. I just want everybody to do it in their own way. And if it's through their family, if it's through their next door neighbor, if it's through something like a massacre, we have history out there that's ready to be told, that's needing to be told, that wants to be told. The other day, I don't even know if I should put this cat out of the bag, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Okay,
I was sitting in a coffee shop, 404 Grounds at the Connect, and Sterling Johnson and I and Kiyomi Rawlings, we were sitting there and we were talking, and Sterling turns to me, and Sterling's just this amazing, you should have him on, Sterling Johnson.
Okay.
He really advocates for understanding how to provide funding for African American genius, right? Like the genius of African Americans, and he just does it in a way that is beautiful. We were talking, and he turns to me and he says, "Do you know about the Atlanta Five?" And I was like, "Are you talking about the police officers, the firefighter? Like, what are you talking about?" He's like, "The Atlanta Five." And I'm like, "Sterling, you got me there. I get it. I'm of the group. I'm always the one to be like, yeah, I know. There's this beautiful wall if you ever go into the Connect with Atlanta history that I curated."
Wow.
So I'm just like, I don't know what you're talking about. And Sterling said the Atlanta Five. One of the Atlanta Five was my grandfather's. My grandfather. They went to Pensacola. It happened in 1975. They went to Pensacola, Florida, for a fishing trip. They've been going on this trip for 20 years, and then they vanished.
Wow.
It was a big deal in 1975.
Wow.
And so I was sitting there like, what do you mean? Right? Wow. And so I go to text it and type it and looking. And I was like, what is this? What is this? Right? So it goes back to there are still stories that we need to tell. And I'm just like, now I'm deep diving into who are the Atlanta Five. And get this, a woman, Gina Billingsley, that I work with on the Chattahoochee Brick, this Chattahoochee Brick Descendants Coalition, which was
I've seen that. Yeah.
Yes. Her brother worked there in modern time, and it was still harsh labor. So after I left Sterling, I just immediately called Miss Gina and was just like, Miss Gina, do you know about this Atlanta Five? And I've been with Miss Gina now for 3 years on the Chattahoochee Brick Project, as well as some community journalism project. And Miss Gina says, yeah, one of the men were my uncle.
Wow.
What are you? Why am I? Yeah. But again, and before I left the Connect, Kiyomi said, they got together with your daddy and said, we need your daughter to know about it. We need your daughter on the case.
Wow.
So now you got to follow it through. And I looked at Kiyomi and I was just like, I guess. I don't know. But then I get in the car and I'm like, let me call Miss Gina. And Miss Gina's like, yeah, that was my uncle. Like, that was my uncle. And she started telling me her side of when they found out they were missing, right? And I was just like, this is crazy. So there's so much stories that is in Atlanta proper, right? But also when you think of how small Atlanta is compared to the rest of the world, think of all the stories that we just aren't telling, that we need to tell, that are history, but also very current day. I mean, I'm still waiting for somebody to deep dive into the Rashad Brooks story. Rashad Brooks was 3 years ago. Who is Rashad Brooks?
That's right.
Right? All we know is that he was murdered. We don't know what made that man laugh. We don't know what school he went to, like on a public, really public. We don't know about how is his baby? Like, who is his mama? Who's his grand? We don't so there is just so many stories that I'm always like, can y'all please tell these stories?
Yes, ma'am.
I can't tell them all.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell them all. I'm 50 plus years back, right? So yeah, that is my thing around whatever you ask me, because I just went on a rampage.
No, that was excellent.
I'm gonna stop talking.
No, and that is excellent. Look, you are killing this, and we
around 1906, yes.
1906.
Yeah.
Again, we had key figures such as Hoke Smith,
Yes.
AJC.
Yes.
What role did the white media play in building up that boiling temperature of them feeling okay to attack black-owned enterprises such as Alonzo Herndon's and so many others? What role did the white media play in that? That we see today too, sometimes, as well.
Yeah, so there's I say this, and people talk about reconciliation a lot these days, and truth and transformation, but I've eased into this new word of redemption, right? I've eased into it with a lot of this is, you do need to redeem yourself, right? And so last year when we were doing, several years now, we've asked and said in multiple ways, multiple different organizations, not just Fulton County Remembrance Coalition, but also, the National Center of Civil and Human Rights. My apologies. Dr. Tate with CCI and STAR, the Southern Center of Truth and Reconciliation. All of us have said on multiple occasions, like, when are y'all going to make a formal apology as just the start, right? For the hurt and the pain that you caused many Atlantans, many Georgians during your time, that you guys were printing hate, essentially. And Howard in 2020 actually did a whole study around how white media nationally was printing hate to cause these types of crimes, right? These massacres and these lynchings and these murders around the country. And so that's essentially what they did. At the time, they were two separate papers, and they merged, I believe, in the 2000s. But they were two separate papers, and both of the publishers were going up for being governor of Georgia. So they both were printing. They both were printing hate. They both were printing that African American men were doing all of these rapes in the city in Georgia. Right before 1906 Atlanta Race Massacre popped off, essentially in September. Like I mentioned, Floyd Carmichael anniversary is coming up. Floyd Carmichael was one of those that was reported in the newspaper in 1906, in July of 1906. So it was a lead up. He is one of the deaths and the accusations that led to this massacre, essentially, right? Floyd Carmichael essentially being killed and lynched in Pittsburgh, Lakewood area, was said that he raped a daughter of a family by the last name of Poole, Poole, I believe. That's how I pronounce it. It might not be pronounced that way, but it's Poole. And there was several of these. It was very hyper centralized that these black men are doing these rapes, these raping and assaulting of white women, and they printed it. They printed it. Other media, white media outlets printed it. The news would speak on it. The radio would speak on it. It was a lot. And while I say the AJC now because they're the ones still around and they're still around benefiting off of African American culture, right? They employ African American people. So there is some type of redemption song that needs to be sang there. So that's the role that they play, and that's the role that I feel like, that's one step to us talking and healing, because my work around history and preservation is healing. We talk about that as the last step, but that's a step that has to be carried through. We have to constantly be on the healing journey because it's not one sore. You find out that someone killed a family member. All right, cool. But now I have to deal with what was the economics in that, right? And having a brother that was murdered in 2000, yes, I had to deal with the fact that he died. But now I even up to present day, I had to deal with the economics of him not being here, right? As a 50-year-old man, like his wealth is not in our family because he's gone, right? His lineage is gone. He has one daughter. But so it's the same thing when you think of these massacres and these lynchings and the genocides of African American bodies, is that it's a multi-layer of removal, and it has to be redeemed. So I say that about the AJC, like that's just step one, apologizing, you know, having some conviction, having some compassion around, we did have a part to play in this. We did, our legacy, maybe not the people here today, because I don't know anybody's family history, so I can't, definitively say your family did or did not play about it. But the legacy, the name that is being used was there in 1906, and that the name carries its own history, and because you own the name, and because you benefit off of the name, then you should want to say, hey, we did this in the first step, because there's many steps, right? The first step, we did this, and the first step in reconciliation is conviction, and just saying, we did this.
Yeah.
We did this. We did this. We did this, and either you're sorry or not sorry. I don't know, but just saying you did it is a start.
Yes.
So that's where I am with the AJC.
Look, I respect it. I've noticed whether it's Rosewood, Tulsa, Wilmington, it's the same script. Atlanta, a white woman saying that she's been raped, and of course it's false. Why is it always the same exact script for every race massacre that we've seen at the turn of the century?
Well, my humble opinion, it is what it has always been. It's the protection of white women, right? The fragileness of white women, the need to come to their aid. That is what it is. Like, who carries the child? It's the woman, right? And so that is what is self-preservation, essentially, right? Protect the woman, protect self, because the woman carries the child. So if you allow people to not uphold this person in glory, right? Because that's essentially what it is. Like, you must know that this is off limits to you. This white woman is off limits to you. Like, how dare you? It's the constant superiority of it all. That's what it comes down to. Self-preservation, in my book, in my thoughts, in my research, is self-preservation, but also in order to preserve self. At the time, I believe, and still in some people's mind today, in order to preserve something, you must kill something, right? Or you must execute something, or you must get rid of something, because if you don't, it becomes intrusive and invasive and it takes over. And it's just like, have you not seen the trees in a forest?
Wow.
All of them are there together, right? But that's what it comes to, like self-preservation. All of these massacres, all of these lynchings, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, convict leasing, enslavement is about the preservation of white ness. I can't even say culture, but whiteness, right? White traditions. And that's what they were about, especially in 1906, because you're talking about the turn of the century. You're talking about the upward mobility of African Americans.
Yeah.
You're talking about the original 33 legislators that are currently in office that are all black. You're talking about Frederick Douglass. You're talking about all of these great minds, W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, Booker T. Washington having clout at this time. You're talking about the Harlem Renaissance leading up into it, right? You're talking about the birth of, the Madam C.J. Walker era, and you're just all of these defining moments that are happening in our culture, not just here but like globally, right? I was just watching the documentary, Grandpa Was an Emperor, of the Haile Selassie story. And I've studied, because I was raised in the Rastafarian culture, I'm aware of Haile Selassie and the Ethiopian community, the Ethiopian oh God, the Ethiopian empire. But I had no clue when I sat down and put dates together. Haile Selassie lived the same time as so many of our people, right? That we talk about. He died in 1984.
That's crazy.
Right? And I was sitting there like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And so we are talking about what was happening on our shores. We don't realize that Europe had their own thing going on of great black minds, right? Africa had an emergence, and the South America was having an emergence. And so when you're looking at this and you're controlling the media at the time, white people were controlling the media heavy. So they were seeing an uprising in the African descent people, or people, no, black people. I don't want to say people of color. So black people across the globe. So when you have that bird's eye view of it, all you can think about is self-preservation. Because what if all of them do get together? I think it's Langston Hughes that say the day that the black person is no longer, the day that the black people no longer want to be seen as meek, right? Or docile, something that docile, right? Like what is going to happen the day that black people are like, I'm just going to get up. I'm going to get up and just start fucking shit up, right? Like that's the fear. The fear is that the black person is going to one day globally say, burn it down. We can rebuild. We built the shit the first time. Wow. It's self-preservation, all in all. But the first thing you have to preserve in any nation is the woman. Yes. And that's what they were doing.
Wow. It's powerful. And second to last question. You've been great. Land memory. What does that
land
mean to
memory.
you? Talk to me about that.
Oh my God, it's my favorite thing to talk about. I love land so much, and I wish everybody loved land like me. There's not a time in my life that I can recall not being in relationship with land. As a child, we all used to have to play outside before y'all all got taken. We all had to play outside. We all had to, drink from either the hose or the well. We all had to be outdoors, right? And so that was my life. In any continent, any country that my parents would have us living in, we knew that land was important. We grew up understanding that each of us needed to obtain land. That land was the most valuable resource known to man. So this new resurgence that I'm seeing of people wanting to buy land and buy back the block, and understanding the generational wealth that is built up of land is beautiful to me, because at one point it just seemed like my family and I were in this isolated bubble. These Caribbean, American, African, they really never knew where to place us. Was just awkward and weird to have these conversations. But my mother would get the newspaper and circle, land that was for sale in North Carolina, and call to Jamaica and see what was for sale. And just this whole real estate around land was always constant in our home. Not just for housing, but also for resources, right? Like everything we use comes from agriculture, and I don't think we know that.
Yes.
I did another podcast with Darius Hicks, Wild Black, about the importance of land. So if you ever get a chance to listen to that, it's called Not Just Peas and Carrots. But I talk about how Desmond Tutu said, the white man came and he gave us the Bible, and we opened our eyes, and we had the Bible, and the white man came, we had the land, and he had the Bible. We opened our eyes, and we had the Bible, and he had the land, right? So what are you doing if you're not on that trajectory of having land? So I love land, and so which leads me into getting to understand it deeper, on a level of what stories are there. In Fulton County Remembrance Coalition, we have a beautiful project called Stories of the Soil that talks about each of the 36 lynchings from the soil perspective. And so in looking at that project, it was just important for me to say, how do I take this further? How do I tell more stories of the land? How do I make the land the main character in everything that I do? Because it is the main character. If not for the land, who are we? Nature will always win.
That's right.
Right? If we do not have trees, we can't breathe. If we don't have water, we'll die. So the landscape is always number one, and nature always wins. If you put a tree in a sidewalk, the sidewalk is going to get fucked up. The tree's going to be okay. Right? So understanding that, and then, from the very just basic understanding of our bodies, we are connected to the land. So if your memory, when I talk about land memory has to be triggered, right? It's triggered through your five senses, right? And so what if the land was the same thing? What if we need to connect back to the land to be able to trigger our memories, right? Our memories that we need in order to move forward. I love to sit in history because it allows me to see the future. And it allows me a glimpse into the future, I should say. So I love land memory for that. I stand in spaces. I was just telling you all, I was over at the Science Gallery, Emory Science Gallery, for the Lightning Project, which was the former community over where the Mercedes-Benz Stadium is. And even though I wasn't on that land, them placing the story in that museum and seeing pictures of the land and hearing the stories and hearing just the camaraderie of the people, immediately I was emotional just as much as they were, because they carry that land with them. They carry everything. Everything that Lightning was is because of them, right? And that is the power of land memory. If you ever step on a space and immediately feel sad or happy or whatever, you should look at, like, well, what happened here and how is it connected to me? Right? And it might be something that is 100 years old, right? You just never know until you start doing that deep dive on that parcel of land that you stand on. I was in Bowen Homes. I never grew up. I didn't grow up in Bowen Homes. I don't know nothing about Bowen Homes, right? But I was over at Bowen Homes doing a journalism project, and I was standing there with Miss Gina, and I became flushed and just out of my mind. And Miss Gina was like, "What is wrong with you?" And I was just like, "I need to leave." My mouth became dry, and I was just like, I need to go. I don't understand what's happening to me. I can't be here. And then after I got myself together, I said, where was I even standing, right? And I go and I'm typing and I look and I was standing in the exact same place of the Bowen Homes bombing.
Wow. Yep.
Right? The
In
bombing
the
that took
80s, right?
yeah, in the
Yep.
80s that took
Atlanta
out the
child murders.
yeah.
Yep.
And I was like, this is crazy. And then I
Wow.
was talking to Dr. Maurice
Hobson.
Hobson
Shout out to
about
Dr.
it,
Hobson.
right? I was
Yeah.
like talking to him and we were
Yeah.
in Southview when I was
Wow.
telling him, I was like, listen, I need to like talk to you about this experience I had. And he was like, oh, that's because the land is without sanction over there. Nobody ever came back to say, hey, we're sorry. No one ever did any reconciliation of the land or healing of the land in Bowen Homes. So it still is how it is. It's still with all of the grief and the horrific things that happen over there, to include the bombing. No one ever came back to just do something in remembrance of those children. Right? Everybody just rebuild right on top of them. And the Muskogee Creek people, they say the same thing. Like they have had, I've been in conference with them where they're talking about how you can't just come on our indigenous land and just build on top of it. You need to put a layer of topsoil, do some reconciliation, and then build your project, or your project is not going to work. So there's something that the land, there's a memory in the land that holds both good and bad. But it's one of those things of how are we irritating it or triggering it to come up and surface. I was with another gentleman, I'll tell you about land memory, Mr. Ward, out of Vine City. And we were talking one day at the Connect, and he said, have you ever heard about the lynching that took place in Athens in like the 30s or the 40s? And I was like, nope. I'm not even in Athens. I'm in Atlanta. So tell me, right? And he's like, there's this lynching that took place in Athens, and they say they drugged the man. They got the man out of the jail, and they drug him 2 miles south, and then 3 miles north, and then 2 miles east, and then they dropped his body there. And I said, okay. And he said, okay, cool. That's what they did. And I was like, yeah, that's what they did. Like, where are we going? He said, not even 15 days later, guess what happened? I said, I don't know, Mr. Ward, tell me. And he said, a tornado came through and took the exact same path. I was like, oh, it solidifies. I keep having these moments that solidifies there's memory in this land we walk on. And I believe because of our connections, we are not as prone to the negative aspects of that, because our blood has fallen to preserve the land, right, and to protect it. Same thing with the indigenous people, but it's other people, right, that have made the land an accessory to murder. Right? Trees didn't ask to participate in the lynchings. You just decided to lynch a body there. They didn't ask for, the land didn't ask to participate in your atrocities, right? So now you have but the land is keeping record of it, right? And so we have to be careful of where we're standing and how we are interacting as we are consuming the land. In Mississippi, there's this place called the Fruit Bowl in Natchez, Mississippi. Natchez, Mississippi at one time had the largest per capita in wealth due to the enslavement of black bodies. And when, I hope I get the story right, but in the ending, or the deemed ending of the Civil War, there was a concentration camp of African Americans, and it was like something like 200 people died there. And the folklore that comes out of Mississippi is like, don't eat the peaches from Mississippi, even though they're some of the sweetest peaches in Mississippi. And then when you start to be like, well, why? And they're like, because you don't know if they come out of the fruit bowl. The fruit bowl is where the black people died and their bodies are. And all of a sudden, wild peach trees just started growing there. Right? And so I'm always like, well, where the hell does peach come from? Right?
Check the receipts.
Right? And so I just love this idea of land memory, and it's not even an idea. It's a real thing. But the land holding the memory and then going back. In Vine City, Emory did a study of lead, of how the lead has contaminated our soil here in Atlanta. And one of the things that they realized one of the experiments they did is like, well, how do we extract the toxins out of the land? And they planted a few things, and two things took the toxins out of the land the quickest: cowpeas and sunflowers, right? When you go back in history, what did the indigenous people plant here? Cowpeas and sunflowers, right? So now you're now looking at, oh, well, what did the first inhabitants of this land, the first stewards of the land, how did they heal and conduct the land? That's the same way how we heal it. We have to go back, because if you're telling me that cowpeas and sunflowers pulled toxins out of Vine City, right? This is the experiment you did and it was viable, then bring on the damn sunflowers, right? Like, let's plant sunflowers. But when you go back, that was what the indigenous people did. So and the land somehow remembers, oh, we can heal ourselves with this, right? So I love land memory for that, for having us know how to heal, but also letting us know the stories that was done to it. So that's my land memory. That's my stuff around land memory.
And Hill Bond, ladies and gentlemen. My goodness.
I feel like I talked this whole time.
Hey, that's the point. My job is just to ask the questions, sit back, listen to the experts. Hey, you doing what you're supposed to. That was excellent.
I talked so
And
great.
On the way out, where can everybody follow you, keep up with you, upcoming projects?
Oh, Jesus. Ann Hill Bond on all social media. Fulton County Remembrance. Oh, no. Yeah, Fulton County Remembrance is another one on all social media. And I'm at Capital B News Atlanta. You can find my work there. Find my work on Canopy Atlanta. And find my work at Atlanta Voice.
Yes.
And so that's where I am. I'm all around.
Yes.
But always look for me in black and minority media, but in particularly black.
Yes.
I love support Black press. If y'all don't do it now, support Black press in anywhere you are. Look for your local Black newspaper media outlet and share your stories with them. So
yes, thank you, Ann.
You're welcome. Thank y'all for having me.
Had a great time.
I hope y'all
follow
did.
her. Yes, follow Ann. Stay in touch with her. She's amazing, man.
Thank
As
you.
y'all see, and y'all
Thank
she bodied
you.
the
Thank
documentary.
you.
So
oh
we
my
wait for y'all to see it.
goodness.
Unearthing the Black Mecca. Shout out to Aaron, Sid, the entire team.
Yeah.
Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.
Thank
Again,
you.
blessed be host Caleb Smith, and until next time.
Thank
Peace.
you. Bye.